If you're looking at getting into home building, listen up. I'm going to give you 3 tips that I wish I would have learned right from the beginning. It'll save you a lot of time and headache. The first thing that I would say is the order of operations. So there are 2 primary phases in construction. There's the pre-development, which is where you're doing design and engineering with civil, structural engineers, architect, and then there's the construction aspect where you're boots on the ground and you're actually building the structure. In the former, the design and engineering and the permit process, the order of operations is extremely important because you're submitting the planning, the city planning department, the city building and safety, city fire engineering, and also the public works. And knowing which department needs what deliverable at what time is very crucial, because what happens is you can make headway and get approvals with several of the departments. All it takes is one and some missing document, application, or form, and it's holding up everything. So the order of operations is extremely important, especially with the city permitting. Then in construction, order of operations is equally as important, because when you're doing certain scopes, let's say rough in, so you'll do rough mechanical, rough electrical, rough plumbing, and only then, once those are completed, are you able to insulate and drywall, wrap the exterior of the house, only to find that there was one order of operation during rough-in you forgot, and now you're going through ripping out drywall, redoing a scope you should have done previously, and then going back. A scope like that might have been low voltage. It might have been fire sprinkler. It might have been, an extra, wall sconce or ceiling pendant from an electrical standpoint that we needed to do at rough-in. Now we're at final, and that one line has not been run, and we're going to have to go back, open up drywall, close up drywall, repaint. There's a whole slew of things that you have to fix if you don't do everything in its proper order. So that's a huge aspect of construction, is making sure that you have the right order. So the order of operations with utility companies is extremely paramount, and I'll tell you why. As we get toward the last part of construction, so the final, let's call it the last month, couple of months, it's extremely important to make sure that in our order of operations, it's reach out to gas, water, electric, within 60 days of completion or 90 days. What happens is if we get to the very end and we need to reach out to them, we're just a number to utility companies. Without getting into detail, they push us out 30, 60 days. So if it's not already in our schedule and our plan to reach out 60, 90 days in advance, absolutely getting our gas meters and our electric meters on site is going to slow down construction. It's going to slow down completion and our certificate of occupancy. This is why you need to make sure that your order of operations are dialed in. If you're not reaching the utility companies at least 90 days prior to finishing construction, they are absolutely going to delay your certificate of occupancy and your completion of your construction. They take a very, very long time. SoCal Edison, SoCal Gas, just to name a couple. As soon as you notify them that we'll need to get final meters put in, it's 90 days out. So if you call them within 30 days of completion, you're going to have to wait for a very long time to get that executed on. So one of the things we do is we proactively understand that there are long lead time items, such as utility companies, that need to have applications and final meter installations submitted at least 90 days prior to completion of construction. The second most impactful lesson that, had we known at the beginning, would have really made a big difference is know your plans. Understand every page of the field plans, commonly termed the blueprints, and that's going to be the deliverables from the architect, the civil and structural engineer, your topography, your boundary survey, your soils report. Know that cold. There are footers, keynotes, asides. There's a lot of things that seem minute on paper, especially if they seem like they're the size of a disclosure, but they absolutely indicate certain parts of the construction that really had you paid attention to that at the beginning, would make a big difference out in the field. I'll give you a couple of examples. First and foremost, the foundation plans. So if you're not familiar with reading even say the slab schedule or the footing schedule or the shear wall schedule on the aside, you're gonna miss structural steel, hardware, things that are necessary at the very beginning prior to pouring the slab. So definitely pay attention to that. I think it's also one of the ways in which subcontractors or other general contractors out in the field will really gauge whether you know what you're doing or not. If you can't read your plans, and I don't necessarily mean that there are people that don't read them at all. I mean, if you only know the surface level of what these plans mean and you don't know the intricacies of the asides, the keynotes, the abbreviations, I mean, that's a perfect example. If you have UNO and you don't know what that means, or you have AB, or there's all of these different abbreviations, you're not familiar with the jargon or these abbreviations, and then you're out in the field and somebody brings it up to you and you can't tell them what that is. It's a real obvious indication that you're amateur or underexperienced, and the easiest way for a subcontractor to overcharge you for a scope of work is when they get that sense about you. One example I'll give you is, without having a full encompassed understanding of a foundation plan, one mistake I made personally a number of years ago is the anchor bolt schedule. So in a shear wall schedule, it'll tell you how many anchor bolts need to tie in from the slab to through the sill plate and into the framing elements. And we went back after we poured the slab and had to re-drill a couple of dozen anchor bolts, the all threads. I think it was a 5/8 all thread. We had to epoxy new anchor bolts in. We had to have a deputy inspector come out anytime you're doing epoxy on the field. We had to have the building inspector come out. We had to do this multiple times. The third biggest aspect of home building, I absolutely wish we had navigated better from the beginning, is the budget. So this is probably one that is the most common sense focused, in that, you know, the budget is really what makes or breaks these projects. And where I would suggest, and I'm gonna give you this tip, that you really pay attention to is what's called a construction hard cost line by line. Now, soft costs versus hard costs in construction can be summarized pretty easily in that all of the hard costs are the on-site material, labor, the nuts and bolts necessary to construct the property. The soft costs are your permit fees, architecture, engineering fees, school impact fees, your holding costs. But the former, the hard costs, the construction line by line, is extremely important to make sure that you have a really, really good understanding of what the budget looks like, not only while you're in construction and when you're getting bids and proposals from subcontractors, but even equally as important when you're going to start the project. Prior to, you should know a pretty good idea and have a pretty good idea of what the cost of the construction would look like and the breakdown necessary for each different section. I'll give you a little bit more specific examples. Mechanical, electrical, plumbing, foundation, framing, material for lumber, structured steel, all of those I have a pretty good idea of what those cost. And then what we do is we tailor it to, okay, well, this is the square footage of the house, or this is the linear feet of lumber, or this is the amount of bathrooms that we have, or lighting fixtures. Another example would be when you're looking through, all of the offsites. So I'll give you an example. If we understood that the hard cost construction on site would be $1 million, but we're leaving out the fact that there's $150,000 of offsites, whether the city requires to put in sidewalks, curb and gutters, alley dedications, sewer lateral tie-ins. I mean, that $150,000 could make or break, a profit split that changes it from a project that seems like it makes sense to a project that really is, more of an opportunity cost than anything else. So something that I see a lot of other builders mess up on, especially with respect to the budget, is contingency line items, and also over the years, material costs continue to go up. I'll give you a couple of examples. So we're sitting in 2023. About a year ago, lumber was at an all-time high. I think it was pretty commonly understood, but for those of you that aren't familiar, plywood went almost double. And so when you're constructing a ground up new home, that doubling amount could have a very, very large and negative impact on your budget if you're not already taking that into account. So Romex, for example, is just outrageously and extremely overpriced compared to what it was a year ago. So what does this all mean? When you're going through a hard cost construction budget, first and foremost, knowing the budget and having clarity on the different line items in the different areas of the construction process is extremely paramount. Equally as important now, though, especially with years of experience, is once we've completed a project and we have another project, especially when it's the same product type, it's very, as far as size, number of bedrooms and bathrooms, it's very easy to fall into that trap of using the same budget you had in the previous project. Here's where that can be a poor process. When you have a year or two space between projects, even if they're very similar, it's very, very important to increase the cost of living, if you could call it that, increase the budget directly attributed to materials that have gone up in cost. We made that mistake, and it's really, really important that you avoid that.